Section 16 of Psychology of the Unconscious by Carl Jung. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Section 16, Book 4, Part 2. Now it seems to be very obscure why the mystical figure of Jawantapal, whom Miss Miller, in a note, compares to the control spirit of the spiritualistic medium, is found in such a disreputable neighborhood that his nature name was brought into relation with this particular part of the body. In order to understand this possibility, we must realize that when we produce from the unconscious, the first to be brought forth is the infantile material long lost in memory. One must therefore take the point of view of that time in which this infantile material was still on the surface. If now a much honored object is related in the unconscious to the anus, then one must conclude that something of a high valuation was expressed thereby. The question is only whether this corresponds to the psychology of the child. Before we enter upon this question, it must be stated that the anal region is very closely connected with veneration. One thinks of the traditional feces of the great Mogul. An Oriental tale has the same to say of Christian knights who anointed themselves with the excrement of the Pope and cardinals in order to make themselves formidable. A patient who is characterized by a special veneration for her father had a fantasy that she saw her father sitting upon the toilet in a dignified manner, and people going past greeted him effusively. The association of the anal relations by no means excludes high valuation or esteem, as is shown by these examples, and as is easily seen from the intimate connection of feces and gold. Here the most worthless comes into the closest relation with the most valuable. This also happens in religious valuations. I discovered at that time, to my great astonishment, that a young patient, very religiously trained, represented in a dream the Crucified on the bottom of a blue-flowered chamber-pot, namely in the form of excrements. The contrast is so enormous that one must assume that the valuations of childhood must indeed be very different from ours. This is actually the truth. Children bring to the act of defecation and the products of this an esteem and interest which later on is possible only to the hypochondriac. We do not comprehend this interest until we learn that the child very early connects with it a theory of propagation. The libido afflux probably accounts for the enormous interest in this act. The child sees that this is the way in which something is produced, in which something comes out. The same child whom I reported in the little brochure Über Konflikte der kindlichen Seele, and who had a well-developed anal theory of birth, like little Hans, whom Freud made known to us, later contracted a habit of staying a long time on the toilet. Once the father grew impatient, went to the toilet and called, "Do come out of there, what are you making?" Whereupon the answer came from within, "A little wagon and 2 ponies." The child was making a little wagon and 2 ponies, that is to say, things which at that time she especially wished for. In this way one can make what one wishes, and the thing made is the thing wished for. The child wishes earnestly for a doll, or, at heart, for a real child, that is, the child practiced for his future biological task, and in the way in which everything in general is produced, he made the doll himself as representative of the child or of the thing wished for in general. From a patient I have learned a parallel fantasy of her childhood. In the toilet there was a crevice in the wall. She fantasied that from this crevice a fairy would come out and present her with everything for which she wished. The locus is known to be the place of dreams, where much was wished for and created, which later would no longer be suspected of having this place of origin. A pathological fantasy in place here is told us by Lombroso concerning two insane artists. Each of them considered himself God and the ruler of the world. They created or produced the world by making it come forth from the rectum, just as the egg of birds originates in the egg canal. One of these two artists was endowed with a true artistic sense. He painted a picture in which he was just in the act of creation. The world came forth from his anus. The membrum was in full erection. He was naked, surrounded by women, and with all insignia of his power. The excrement is in a certain sense the thing wished for, and on that account it received the corresponding valuation. When I first understood this connection, an observation made long ago, and which disturbed me greatly because I never rightly understood it, became clear to me. It concerned an educated patient who, under very tragic circumstances, had to be separated from her husband and child, and was brought into the insane asylum. She exhibited a typical apathy and slovenliness which was considered as effective mental deterioration. Even at that time I doubted this deterioration, and was inclined to regard it as a secondary adjustment. I took especial pains to ascertain how I could discover the existence of the affect in this case. Finally, after more than 3 hours' hard work, I succeeded in finding a train of thought which suddenly brought the patient into a completely adequate and therefore strongly emotional state. At this moment the affective connection with her was completely re-established. That happened in the forenoon, when I returned at the appointed time in the evening to the ward to see her. She had, for my reception, smeared herself from head to foot with excrement, and cried laughingly, "Do I please you so?" She had never done that before. It was plainly destined for me. The impression which I received was one of a personal affront, and as a result of this I was convinced for years after of the affective deterioration of such cases. Now we understand this act as an infantile ceremony of welcome or a declaration of love. The origin of Jawantapal, that is to say, an unconscious personality, therefore means, in the sense of the previous explanation, I make, produce, invent him myself. It is a sort of human creation or birth by the anal route. The first people were made from excrement, potter's earth or clay. The Latin lutum, which really means moistened earth, also has the transferred meaning of dirt. In Plautus it is even a term of abuse, something like "you scum." The birth from the anus also reminds us of the motive of throwing behind oneself. A well-known example is the oracular command which Deucalion and Pyrrha, who were the only survivors from the great flood, received. They were to throw behind them the bones of the Great Mother. They then threw behind them stones from which mankind sprang. According to a tradition, the dactyli, in a similar manner, sprang from dust which the nymph Anchiala threw behind her. There is also humorous significance attached to the anal products. The excrements are often considered in popular humor as a monument or memorial which plays a special part in regard to the criminal, in the form of grummus murdi. Every one knows the humorous story of the man who, led by the spirit through labyrinthian passages to a hidden treasure, after he had shed all his pieces of clothing, deposited excrement as a last guidepost on his road. In a more distant past, a sign of this kind possessed as great a significance as the dung of animals to indicate the direction taken. Simple monuments, little stone figures, have taken the place of this perishable mark. It is noteworthy that Miss Miller quotes another case where a name suddenly obtruded itself parallel to the emerging into consciousness of Chewantipal, namely Ahama Rama, with the feeling that it dealt with something Assyrian. As a possible source of this, there occurred to her Asurabama, who made cuneiform bricks, those imperishable documents made from clay, the monuments of the most ancient history. If it were not emphasized that the bricks are cuneiform, then it might mean ambiguously wedge-shaped bricks, which is more suggestive of our interpretation than that of the author. Miss Miller remarks that besides the name Ashurabama, she also thought of Ahasuerus or Ahasverus. This fantasy leads to a very different aspect of the problem of the unconscious personality. While the previous materials betrayed to us something of the infantile theory of creation, this fantasy opens up a vista into the dynamics of the unconscious creation of personality. Ahasver is, as is well known, the wandering Jew. He is characterized by endless and restless wanderings until the end of the world. The fact that the author has thought of this particular name justifies us in following this trail. The legend of Ahasver, the first literary traces of which belong to the 13th century, seems to be of Occidental origin and belongs to those ideas which possess indestructible vital energy. The figure of the wandering Jew has undergone more literary elaboration than the figure of Faust, and nearly all of this work belongs to the last century. If the figure is not called Ahasver, still it is there under another name, perhaps as Count of Saint Germain, the mysterious Rosicrucian, whose immortality was assured, and whose temporary residence, the land, was equally known. Although the stories about Ahasver cannot be traced back any earlier than the 13th century, the oral tradition can reach back considerably further, and it is not an impossibility that a bridge to the Orient exists. There is the parallel figure of Chitter, or Al-Chitter, the ever-youthful Chitter, celebrated in song by Rückert. The legend is purely Islamitic. The peculiar feature, however, is that Chitter is not only a saint, but in Sufric circles rises even to divine significance. In view of the severe monotheism of Islam, one is inclined to think of Chitter as a pre-Islamitic Arabian divinity who would hardly be officially recognized by the new religion, but might have been tolerated on political grounds. But there is nothing to prove that. The first traces of Chitter are found in the commentaries of the Koran, Bukhari, and Tabari, and in a commentary to a noteworthy passage of the 18th Surah of the Koran. The 18th Surah is entitled The Cave, that is after the cave of the seven sleepers, who, according to the legend, slept there for 309 years, and thus escaped persecution and awoke in a new era. Their legend is recounted in the 18th Surah, and divers reflections were associated with it. The wish-fulfillment idea of the legend is very clear, the mystic material, for it is the immutable model of the sun's course. The sun sets periodically, but does not die. It hides in the womb of the sea or in a subterranean cave, and in the morning is born again, complete. The language in which this astronomic occurrence is clothed is one of clear symbolism. The sun returns into the mother's womb, and after some time is again born. Of course, this event is properly an incestuous act, of which in mythology clear traces are still retained, not the least of which is the circumstance that the dying and resurrected gods are the lovers of their own mothers, or have generated themselves through their own mothers. Christ, as the God becoming flesh, has generated himself through Mary. Mithra has done the same. These gods are unmistakable sun gods, for the sun also does this in order to again renew himself. Naturally, it is not to be assumed that astronomy came first and these conceptions of gods afterwards. The process was, as always, inverted, and it is even true that primitive magic charms of rebirth, baptism, superstitious usages of all sorts concerning the cure of the sick, etc., were projected into the heavens. These youths were born from the cave, the womb of Mother Earth, like the sun gods in a new era, and this was the way they vanquished death. In this far they were immortal. It is now interesting to see how the Koran comes, after long ethical contemplations, in the course of the same Shura, to the following passage, which is of especial significance for the origin of the Chitr myth. For this reason I quote the Koran literally. Remember when Moses said to his servant, I will not stop till I reach the confluence of the two seas, or for 80 years will I journey on. But when they reached their confluence, they forgot their fish, and it took its way in the sea at will. And when they had passed on, Moses said to his servant, Bring us our morning meal, for now we have incurred weariness from this our journey. He said, What thinkest thou? When we repaired to the rock for rest, then verily I forgot the fish, and none but Satan made me forget it, so as not to mention it, and it hath taken its way in the sea in a wondrous sort. He said, It is this we were in quest of. So they both went back, retracing their footsteps. Then found they one of our servants, to whom we had vouchsafed our mercy, and whom we had instructed with our knowledge. Moses said to him, Shall I follow thee, that thou teach me for guidance of that which thou hast been taught? He said, Verily, thou canst by no means have patience with me, and how canst thou be patient in matters whose meaning thou comprehendest not? Translation Rodwell, page 188. Moses now accompanies the mysterious servant of God, who does divers things which Moses cannot comprehend. Finally, the unknown takes leave of Moses and speaks to him as follows: They will ask thee of Dul Karnain, the two-horned. Say, I will recite to you an account of him. Verily, we established his power upon the earth, and we gave him a means to accomplish every end. So he followed his way, until when he reached the setting of the sun, he found it to set in a miry forest, and hard by he found a people. Now follows a moral reflection. Then the narrative continues. Then he followed his course further, until he came to the place where the sun rises. If now we wish to know who is the unknown servant of God, we are told in this passage he is Dul Karnain, Alexander the sun. He goes to the place of setting, and he goes to the place of rising. The passage about the unknown servant of God is explained by the commentaries in a well-defined legend. The servant is Chitr, the verdant one, the never-tiring wanderer, who roams for hundreds and thousands of years over lands and seas, the teacher and counselor of pious men, the one wise in divine knowledge, the immortal. The authority of the Tabari associates Chitr with Dul Karnain. Chitr is said to have reached the stream of life as a follower of Alexander, and both unwittingly had drunk of it, so that they became immortal. Moreover, Chitr is identified by the old commentators with Elias, who also did not die, but who was taken to heaven in a fiery chariot. Elias is Helios. It is to be observed that Ahasver also owes his existence to an obscure place in the holy Christian scriptures. This place is to be found in Matthew 16:28. First comes the scene where Christ appoints Peter as the rock of his church, and nominates him the governor of his power. After that follows the prophecy of his death, and then comes the passage, Verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Here follows the scene of the transfiguration. And was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias, talking with him. Then answered Peter, and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elias. From these passages it appears that Christ stands on the same plane as Elias, without being identified with him, although the people consider him as Elias. The Ascension places Christ as identical with Elias. The prophecy of Christ shows that there exist, aside from himself, one or more immortals who shall not die until parousia. According to John 21, 22nd verse, the boy John was considered as one of these immortals, and in the legend he is in fact not dead, but merely sleeping in the ground until parousia, and breathes so that the dust swirls round his grave. As is evident, there are passable bridges from Christ by way of Elias to Chitter and Ahasuerus. It is said, in an account of this legend, that Dul Carnine led his friend Chitter to the source of life in order to have him drink of immortality. Alexander also bathed in the stream of life and performed the ritual ablutions. As I previously mentioned in a footnote, according to Matthew 17, 12th verse, John the Baptist is Elias, therefore primarily identical with Chitter. Now, however, it is to be noted that in the Arabian legend Chitter appears rather as a companion or accompanied Chitter with Dul Carnine, or with Elias, like unto them, or identified with them. There are, therefore, 2 similar figures who resemble each other, but who nevertheless are distinct. The analogous situation in the Christian legend is found in the scene by the Jordan, where John leads Christ to the source of life. Christ is there, the subordinate, John the superior, similar to Dul Carnine and Chitter, or Chitter and Moses, also Elias. The latter relation especially is such that Vollers compares Chitter and Elias on the one side with Gilgamesh and his immortal brother Ea Bani, on the other side with the Dioscuri, one of whom is immortal, the other mortal. This relation is also found in Christ and John the Baptist on the one hand, and Christ and Peter on the other. The last named parallel only finds its explanation through comparison with the Mithraic mysteries, where the esoteric contents are revealed to us through monuments. Upon the Mithraic marble relief of Klagenfurt it is represented how with a halo Mithra crowns Helios, who either kneels before him or else floats up to him from below. Mithra is represented on a Mithraic monument of Osterberken as holding in his right hand the shoulder of the mystic ox above Helios, who stands bowed down before him, the left hand resting on a sword hilt. A crown lies between them on the ground. Cumont observes about this scene that it probably represents the divine prototype of the ceremony of the initiation into the degree of miles, in which a sword and a crown were conferred upon the mystic. Helios is therefore appointed the miles of Mithra. In a general way, Mithra seems to occupy the role of patron to Helios, which reminds us of the boldness of Hercules towards Helios. Upon his journey towards Geryon, Helios burns too hotly. Hercules, full of anger, threatens him with his never-failing arrows. Therefore Helios is compelled to yield, and lends to the hero his sun-ship, with which he was accustomed to journey across the sea. Thus Hercules returns to Erythea, to the cattle herds of Geryon. On the monument at Klagenfurt, Mithra is furthermore represented pressing Helios's hand, either in farewell or as a ratification. In a further scene, Mithra mounts the chariot of Helios, either for the ascension or the sea journey. Cumont is of the opinion that Mithra gives to Helios a sort of ceremonious investiture, and consecrates him with his divine power by crowning him with his own hands. This relation corresponds to that of Christ to Peter. Peter, through his symbol, the cock, has the character of a sun god. After the ascension or sea journey of Christ, he is the visible pontiff of the divinity. He suffers, therefore, the same death, crucifixion, as Christ, and becomes the great Roman deity Sol Invictus, the conquering triumphant church itself, embodied in the Pope. In the scene of Malchus he is always shown as the Miles of Christ, to whom the sword is granted, and as the rock upon which the church is founded. The crown is also given to him who possesses the power to bind and to set free. Thus Christ, like the sun, is the visible God, whereas the Pope, like the heir of the Roman Caesars, is solus invicti comus. The setting sun appoints a successor whom he invests with the power of the sun. Dog Carnine gives Chitter eternal life. Chitter communicates his wisdom to Moses. There even exists a report according to which the forgetful servant of Joshua drinks from the well of life, whereupon he becomes immortal and is placed in a ship by Chitter and Moses as a punishment, and is cast out to sea. Once more a fragment of a sun myth, the motive of the sea journey. The primitive symbol which designates that portion of the zodiac in which the sun, with the winter solstice, again enters upon the yearly course, is the goat fish sign, the Ipalpos. The sun mounts like a goat to the highest mountain, and later goes into the water as a fish. The fish is the symbol of the child, for the child before his birth lives in the water like a fish, and the sun, because it plunges into the sea, becomes equally child and fish. The fish, however, is also a phallic symbol, also a symbol for the woman. Briefly stated, the fish is a libido symbol, and indeed, as it seems, predominantly for the renewal of the libido. The journey of Moses with his servant is a life journey, 80 years. They grow old and lose their life force, libido, that is, they lose the fish, which pursues its course in a marvelous manner to the sea, which means the setting of the sun. When the two notice their loss, they discover at the place where the source of life is found, where the dead fish revived and sprang into the sea, Chitter, wrapped in his mantle, sitting on the ground. According to another version, he sat on an island in the sea, or in the wettest place on earth, that is, he was just born from the maternal depths. Where the fish vanished, Chitter, the verdant one, was born as a son of the deep waters, his head veiled, a Kabir, a proclaimer of divine wisdom, the old Babylonian Oannes Ea, who was represented in the form of a fish, and daily came from the sea as a fish to teach the people wisdom. His name was brought into connection with John's. With the rising of the renewed sun, all that lived in darkness, as water animal or fish, surrounded by all terrors of night and death, became as the shining fiery firmament of the day. Thus the words of John the Baptist gain especial meaning. I indeed baptize you with water unto repentance, but he that cometh after me is mightier than I, whose shoes I am not worthy to bear. He shall baptize you with the Holy Ghost and with fire. With Vollers we may also compare Chitter and Elias, Moses and his servant Joshua, with Gilgamesh and his brother Eabani. Gilgamesh wandered through the world, driven by anxiety and longing to find immortality. His path led him across the seas to the wise Utnapishtim, Noah, who knew how to cross the waters of death. There Gilgamesh had to dive down to the bottom of the sea for the magical herb, which was to lead him back to the land of men. When he had come again to his native land, a serpent stole the magic plant from him. The fish again slid into the sea, but on the return from the land of the blessed, an immortal mariner accompanied him, who, banished by a curse of Utnapishtim, was forbidden to return to the land of the blessed. Gilgamesh's journey had lost its purpose on account of the loss of the magic herb. Instead, he is accompanied by an immortal, whose fate indeed we cannot learn from the fragments of the epic. This banished immortal is the model for Ahasver, as Jensen aptly remarked. Again we encounter the motive of Dioscuri, mortal and immortal, setting and rising sun. This motive is also represented as if projected from the hero. The sacrificium Mithriacum, the sacrifice of the bull, is, in its religious representation, very often flanked by the two Datophores, Cauties and Cautopates, one with a raised and the other with a lowered torch. They represent brothers who reveal their character through the symbolic position of the torch. Cumont connects them, not without meaning, with the sepulchral erotes, who, as genii with the reversed torches, have traditional meaning. The one is supposed to stand for death, and the other for life. I cannot refrain from mentioning the similarity between the sacrificium Mithraicum, where the sacrifice bull in the centre is flanked on both sides by deophores, to the Christian sacrifice of the ram. The crucified is also traditionally flanked by the two thieves, one of whom ascends to paradise, while the other descends to hell. The idea of the mortal and the immortal seems to have passed also into the Christian worship. Semitic gods are often represented as flanked by two paradroi, for example, Baal of Edessa, accompanied by Aziz and Monemotes, Baal as the sun, accompanied by Mars and Mercury, as expressed in astronomical teachings. According to the Chaldean view, the gods are grouped into triads. In this circle of ideas belongs also the Trinity, the idea of the triune God, in which Christ must be considered in his unity with the Father and the Holy Ghost. So too do the two thieves belong inwardly to Christ. The two deophores are, as Cumont points out, nothing but offshoots from the chief figure of Mithra, to whom belongs a mysterious threefold character. According to an account of Dionysius Areopagita, the magicians celebrated a festival, Ton Patala Mythopa, of the threefold Mithra. An observation, likewise, referring to the Trinity, is made by Plutarch concerning Ormuz, Apostara Athen Apendenton Lethias. Having expanded himself threefold, he departed from the sun. The Trinity, as three different states of the unity, is also a Christian thought. In the very first place, this suggests the sun myth. An observation by Macrobius 1:18 seems to lend support to this idea. In Latin, now these differences in the seasons refer to the sun, which seems at the winter solstice. An infant, such as the Egyptians on a certain day bring out of their sanctuaries, at the vernal equinox it is represented as a youth. Later, at the summer solstice, its age is represented by a full growth of beard, while at the last the god is represented by the gradually diminishing form of an old man. As Cumont observes, Cautis and Catapates occasionally carry in their hands the head of a bull and a scorpion. Taurus and Scorpio are equinoctial signs, which clearly indicate that the sacrificial scene refers primarily to the sun cycle, the rising sun, which sacrifices itself at the summer solstice, and the setting sun. In the sacrificial scene, the symbol of the rising and setting sun was not easily represented. Therefore, this idea was removed from the sacrificial image. We have pointed out above that the Dioscuri represent a similar idea, although in a somewhat different form. The one sun is always mortal, the other immortal. As this entire sun mythology is merely a psychologic projection to the heavens, the fundamental thesis probably is as follows. Just as man consists of a mortal and immortal part, so the sun is a pair of brothers, one being mortal, the other immortal. This thought lies at the basis of all theology in general. Man is indeed mortal, but there are some who are immortal, or there is something in us which is immortal. Thus the gods, a Chitter or a Saint Germain, are our immortal part, which, though incomprehensible, dwells among us somewhere. Comparison with the sun teaches us over and over again that the gods are libido. It is that part of us which is immortal, since it represents that bond through which we feel that in the race we are never extinguished. It is life from the life of mankind. Its springs, which well up from the depths of an unconscious, come, as does our life in general, from the root of the whole of humanity, since we are indeed only a twig broken off from the mother and transplanted. Since the divine in us is the libido, we must not wonder that we have taken along with us in our theology ancient representations from olden times, which give the triune figure to the god. We have taken this Paterlaph, threefold God, from the phallic symbolism, the originality of which may well be uncontested. The male genitals are the basis for this trinity. It is an anatomical fact that one testicle is generally placed somewhat higher than the other, and it is also a very old, but nevertheless still surviving superstition that one testicle generates a boy and the other a girl. A late Babylonian bas-relief from La Jard's collection seems to be in accordance with this view. In the middle of the image stands an androgynous god, masculine and feminine face. Upon the right male side is found a serpent with a sun halo round its head. Upon the left female side there is also a serpent with the moon above its head. Above the head of the god there are 3 stars. This ensemble would seem to confirm the trinity of the representation. The sun, serpent at the right side is male, the serpent at the left side is female, signified by the moon. This image possesses a symbolic sexual suffix, which makes the sexual significance of the whole obtrusive. Upon the male side a rhomb is found, a favorite symbol of the female genitals. Upon the female side there is a wheel or felly. A wheel always refers to the sun, but the spokes are thickened and enlarged at the ends, which suggests phallic symbolism. It seems to be a phallic wheel, which was not unknown in antiquity. There are obscene bas-reliefs where Cupid turns a wheel of nothing but phalli. It is not only the serpent which suggests the phallic significance of the sun. I quote one especially marked case from an abundance of proof. In the antique collection at Verona, I discovered a late Roman mystic inscription in which are the following representations. These symbols are easily read: sun, phallus, moon, vagina, uterus. This interpretation is confirmed by another figure of the same collection. There the same representation is found, only the vessel is replaced by the figure of a woman. The impressions on coins, where in the middle a palm is seen encoiled by a snake, flanked by 2 stones, testicles, or else in the middle a stone encircled by a snake, to the right a palm, to the left a shell, female genitals, should be interpreted in a similar manner. In Lajard's researches, The Cult of Venus, there is a coin of Perga, where Artemis of Perga is represented by a conical stone, phallic, flanked by a man, claimed to be Min, and by a female figure, claimed to be Artemis. Men, the so-called Lunis, is found upon an Attic bas-relief, apparently with the spear, but fundamentally a scepter with a phallic significance, flanked by Pan with a club, phallus, and a female figure. The traditional representation of the crucified, flanked by John and Mary, is closely associated with this circle of ideas, precisely as is the crucified with the thieves. From this we see how, beside the sun, there emerges again and again the much more primitive comparison of the libido with the phallus. An especial trace still deserves mention here. The data for Katapates, who represents Mithra, is also represented with the cock and the pineapple, but these are the attributes of the Phrygian god Min, whose cult was widely diffused. Min was represented with Pyleus, the pineapple and the cock, also in the form of a boy, just as the dataphores are boyish figures. This last named property relates them with Min to the Kabiri. Min has a very close connection with Attis, the son and lover of Cybele. In the time of the Roman Caesars, Min and Attis were entirely identified, as stated above. Attis also wears the pileus, like Min, Mithra, and the dataphores. As the son and lover of his mother, he again leads us to the source of this religion-creating incest libido, namely to the mother. Incest leads logically to ceremonial castration. In the Attic Cybele cult, for the hero, driven insane by his mother, mutilates himself. I must at present forego entering more deeply into this matter, because the incest problem is to be discussed at the close. Let this suggestion suffice, that from different directions the analysis of the libido symbolism always leads back again to the mother incest. Therefore we may surmise that the longing of the libido, raised to God, repressed into the unconscious, is a primitive incestuous one, which concerns the mother. Through renouncing the virility to the first beloved, the mother, the feminine element, becomes extremely predominant, hence the strongly androgynous character of the dying and resurrected Redeemer. That these heroes are nearly always wanderers is a psychologically clear symbolism. The wandering is a representation of longing, of the ever restless desire, which nowhere finds its object, for, unknown to itself, it seeks the lost mother. The wandering association renders the sun comparison easily intelligible. Also, under this aspect, the heroes always resemble the wandering sun, which seems to justify the fact that the myth of the hero is a sun myth. But the myth of the hero, however, is, as it appears to me, the myth of our own suffering unconscious, which has an unquenchable longing for all the deepest sources of our own being, for the body of the mother, and through it for communion with infinite life in the countless forms of existence. Here I must introduce the words of the Master, who has divined the deepest roots of Faustian longings. Unwilling I reveal a loftier mystery. In solitude are throned the goddesses, no space around them, place and time, still less. Only to speak of them embarrasses. They are the mothers. Goddesses, unknown to ye, the mortals named by us unwillingly, delve in the deepest depths must thou to reach them. 'Tis thine own fault that we for help beseech them. Where is the way? No way to the unreachable, ne'er to be trodden, a way to the unbeseechable, never to be besought. Art thou prepared? There are no locks, no latches to be lifted. Through endless solitudes shalt thou be drifted. Hast thou through solitudes and deserts dared? And hadst thou swum to farthest verge of ocean, and there the boundless space beheld, still hadst thou seen wave after wave in motion, even though impending doom thy fear compelled. Thou hast seen something in the beryl dim of peace lulled seas, the sport of dolphins swim, hadst seen the flying clouds, sun, moon, and star. Naught shalt thou see in endless void afar, not hear thy footstep fall, nor meet a stable spot to rest thy feet. Here, take this key. The key will scent the true place from all others. Follow it down, 'twill lead thee to the mothers. Descend then. I could also say ascend. 'Twere all the same. Escape from the created. To shapeless forms and liberated spaces. Enjoy what long ere this was dissipated. There whirls the press, like clouds on clouds unfolding. Then with stretched arm swing high the key thou art holding. At last a blazing tripod tells thee this, that there the utterly deepest bottom is. Its light to thee will then the mothers show. Some in their seats, the others stand or go at their own will. Formation, transformation, the eternal mind's eternal recreation. Forms of all creatures there are floating free. They'll see thee not, for only wraiths they see. So pluck up heart, the danger then is great. Go to the tripod ere thou hesitate, and touch it with the key. End of Section 16.